For many years, Paul had been in trouble with the Jews. He himself was a Jew, a Pharisee, a very learned man, and he presented the case for Jesus Christ being the Messiah very effectively, which was fine for those who would accept the case, but those who would not accept it could not defeat him by reason or argument, and so they responded by attacking. And many times Paul had been in trouble because of the attacks of the Jews. When he came to Jerusalem with a gift from the churches of Achaia and Macedonia to worship the Lord according to the custom of his fathers, he sought to keep a low profile and to demonstrate that he was walking in the ways of the fathers. And so he came into the temple to worship. But some Jews from Asia recognized him. They had seen him with Trophimus the Greek in the city, and presumed he had brought Trophimus into the temple and defiled the temple. Therefore they caused an uproar, urging all the Jews around them to join with them, starting to beat Paul. They caused such a noise, though, that the Roman garrison next door was alerted, and the commander came and rescued Paul from their hands. And Paul addressed the people from the stairs, giving them his testimony, why he was a follower of Jesus. But when he mentioned that Jesus had sent him to the Gentiles, they broke into uproar again. And so Paul was in custody. The governor took him to the council to find out what his offence was, but that ended up in a riot as well, because Paul pointed out to them that he was being judged on the issue of the resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees allow for resurrection, the Sadducees don't. And so Paul was taken back into custody yet again. His enemies were determined to be rid of him. 40 of them made a conspiracy whereby the chief priest would ask the governor if Paul could come and be examined yet again before their council. But while he was on their way, these men would assassinate him. This became known, though, to Paul's nephew, who told Paul, who sent him to the commander. And the commander promptly sent Paul at night under armed escort to Caesarea, well out of harm's way, and commanded that the chief priest should go and present the case before the governor Felix in Caesarea. After 7 days, Ananias, the high priest, came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, "Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace, and prosperity is being brought to this nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear, by your courtesy, a few words from us. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him, and wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander Lysias came by, and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. By examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered, Inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do now cheerfully answer for myself, because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with anybody, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city. Nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. But this I confess, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offence towards God and men. Now after many years I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object, if they had anything against me. Or else let those who are here themselves say if they have found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council. Unless it was for this one statement which I cried out, standing among them, concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged by you this day. When Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, he adjourned the proceedings and said, When Lysias the commander comes down, I will make a decision on your case. So he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him. And after some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Now as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and answered, Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you. Meanwhile he also hoped that money would be given him by Paul, that he might release him. Therefore he sent for him more often, and conversed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do the Jews a favour, left Paul bound. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from Acts chapter 24. Another address of Paul's reported by Luke. There are 7 addresses, and each one is different because they're to a different audience. And when we speak to people, we need to recognise the issues that are before them. When he stood before the crowd on the steps at the temple, he gave his testimony. But here he has been charged with specific offences, namely causing dissension among the Jews, being a plague, being a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, profaning the temple. Tertullus accuses the commander Lysias of coming with great violence to take him out of our hands, but they would have killed Paul if Lysias had not intervened. In making his response, Paul points out it's only 12 days since he came to Jerusalem, and 5 of those days he's been in prison in Caesarea. He was not disputing with anybody in the temple, in the streets, or in the synagogues. He had kept a low profile. He wasn't inciting a crowd, and he had not defiled the temple. But he does follow God according to the way which they call a sect. He doesn't back off from the fact that he seeks to worship God in complete accord with the Old Testament scriptures. He believes everything that is written in them. He has hope in God, and he believes in the resurrection. The real issue is the resurrection. He doesn't specifically mention Jesus, but it's implicit, because the Christians claim that Jesus rose from the dead, and they acknowledge that we shall all rise and we shall all be judged. But the Christians declare that it is Jesus who is the judge. He is the Messiah. Well, Felix has been a governor for a while. His wife is Jewish, and this Christian issue has been around for 20 years now, and so he is somewhat acquainted with the way. But he chooses not to make a ruling, postponing the matter, but takes the opportunity over the next 2 years to meet with Paul, to hear the argument from Paul. But when Paul's argument becomes too compelling, he breaks off the conversation, but does give Paul liberty to receive his friends and to receive gifts from them. And in this period of time, Paul works with Mark and Luke while they prepare their written Gospels. And so 2 years pass but are not wasted.